Glory to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to another episode of City of Desert. Once more, we are picking up with our reading from the first volume of the Philokalia and the writings of Evagrius of Pontus, one of the great teachers from early monasticism, and certainly one who had a great influence on those who followed him. And he continues to still have a great influence upon the faithful today in his writings. And we are looking in particular at his sayings on asceticism and stillness. And what he's been speaking to us about simply is staying, waiting upon the Lord, remaining for a monk in one's cell, that is, staying in the silence, not leaving it and opening oneself up to distractions or interactions with others that would take away what was precious and hard won, the silence of mind and heart that allows for an unceasing prayer to God. And certainly for those living in the world, we don't live the radical solitude that the monks did. But nonetheless, we are called to a kind of simplicity of life that allows room, and not only room, but allows us to shape our life around the relationship with God, allow it to flow from that relationship with God, rather than squeezing it in at the margins of an otherwise busy life. And so, what Evagrius says to the monks, I think he says to us as well, with every bit as much truth within it. And today we are on page 35 of the first volume of the Philokalia, and we are looking at paragraph number 10. I'm sorry, at number 11 at the bottom, top of the page. Evagrius writes, "Do not hanker after fine foods and deceitful pleasures, for she that indulges in pleasure is dead while still alive, as the apostle says," quoting here 1 Timothy. "Do not fill your belly with other people's food in case you develop a longing for it, and this longing makes you want to eat at their table. For it is said, 'Do not be deceived by the filling of the belly.'" Proverbs 24. "If you find yourself continually invited outside your cell, decline the invitations, for continual absence from your cell is harmful. It deprives you of the grace of stillness, darkens your mind, withers your longing for God. If a jar of wine is left in the same place for a long time, the wine in it becomes clear, settled, and fragrant. But if it is moved about, the wine becomes turbid and dull, tainted by the lees. So you too should stay in the same place, and you will find how greatly this benefits you. Do not have relationships with too many people, lest your intellect becomes distracted and so disturbs the way of stillness." So, not disturbing the way of stillness. And again, this is not simply a monastic aspect of the spiritual life. It is for all Christians who have been called to share in the life of Christ in a radical way. And stillness, silence is absolutely necessary for this reality to take hold, for us to open ourselves vulnerably to God and to listen in that silence. Saint Isaac the Syrian, if you remember, says silence is the language of the kingdom. It is in silence that God is able to speak a word that is equal to himself, and that we are able to comprehend in and through his grace and the gift of faith in particular, comprehend a truth that is beyond the limits of reason, imagination. And we are able to be guided in accord with his will, rather than simply our own dissecting of the realities of our day-to-day life. And so the counsel that Evagrius gives here is important, and he begins with eating in particular. Do not hanker for fine foods and deceitful pleasures, that when one begins to develop a taste for rich foods in particular, rather than simple and sometimes even uncooked foods, enough to nourish, but not to fill the belly, Outside of that, it becomes very difficult to pray. When a person eats a heavy meal, rich foods, meat, that the body has to begin the process physiologically of digesting it. And so a person becomes weighed down, sleepy. And so in this sluggishness, finds it difficult to hold fast to prayer and to hunger for he who is the bread of life, he who is the Lord of love, who nourishes us upon himself. And so Evagrius says, avoid developing a taste for rich foods. In fact, we should be doing the opposite, seeking to have a modest diet, certainly to be healthy, but not extravagant. This not only allows us to maintain the fasting uh, practices of the church, but also to engage in almsgiving. What we save in eating simply, we are able then to provide for the needs of those who have little. He continues, do not fill your belly with other people's food in case you develop a longing for it. And a longing makes you want to eat at their table. So if you happen to see that an individual is a good cook, or if a monk would see that a certain monastery or at a certain hermitage that a monk prepares plates that or are more tasty or filling than his own, it can come into one's mind that I'll go and share at their table as frequently as I can. And there is a subtle seduction here. It can be seen under the context of hospitality or wanting to engage others, even about the spiritual life, to spend time talking to others about one's relationship with God, when in reality, it is more about breaking bread with them and eating foods that are rich, more rich and tasty. Whereas when one lives in solitude, there often develops a radical simplicity in that diet. Many of the monks would fast daily, maintain that is the regular fast. They would eat one meal a day. And what they found is that this helped to deepen their prayer, but they were able to eat lightly but eat sufficiently for the day's labor, which for them was to engage in constancy of prayer and a little bit of work that they did in order to support their needs. But they would not go beyond that. The moment that one begins to visit various places or various people, you begin to slide out of the deeper asceticism into which God has drawn one, and begin to feast more abundantly at another person's table. Finally, he says, for it is said, do not be deceived by filling the belly. So one can convince oneself that one's health is dependent upon eating a great deal, and that we are only able to fulfill the work that God has set before us by eating abundantly. And in modern culture, this is very true. People eat not one meal a day, but at least 3 meals a day, and oftentimes will eat smaller meals, but 6 or 7 times a day, and snack, graze, as it were, within the kitchen. Whereas a spiritual person learns to avoid the refectory, the dining area, outside of meals, so as not to tempt oneself to constantly be filling one's belly. That we can convince ourselves that every time one feels the growl in one's belly from hunger, that one needs food or one needs to drink something. And Evagrius says this is a delusion. And so we have to train the mind and the heart through the practice of fasting to limit ourselves to what is absolutely necessary, but also at these times to deepen our prayer, nourishing ourselves upon the grace of God. If you find yourself, he says, continually living outside the cell, decline the invitations, for continual absence from your cell is harmful. It deprives you of the grace of stillness, darkens your mind, withers your longing for God. If a jar of wine is left in the same place for a long time, the wine in it becomes clear, settled, and fragrant. But if it is moved around a great deal, it becomes turbid, and one ends up drinking the dregs, if you will, the lees that are at the bottom and sink to the bottom of a bottle or a jug. And so what he's telling us there is if we remain still within the cell, praying, then we are going to be nourished. We are going to be given the finest wine, if you will. That is what we receive from the hand of God. And if we are stepping outside of the cell and engaging in conversations, we are going to dull our mind and our sensibilities to the point that we no longer are listening to God at all. We become distracted with our work or conversation with others. And so he tells us rather directly to not have relationships with too many people, lest your intellect, that is the eye, the heart, becomes distracted and disturbs your stillness. One of the great prophets said, have many acquaintances, one in 1,000 as a confidant. So very few that know the depths of one's heart, one's greatest desire, longing for God. And so Evagrius is telling us, have few people that are friends, that with whom you're close, that seek to breathe that same air, that desire the things that you desire, that desire the kingdom and its righteousness above all things. Otherwise, we will constantly be disturbing, again, the stillness of our hearts, losing what has been hard won through remaining in silence and praying for long periods of time. So let us pray today, once again, for not only the practice, the grace of stillness, but to love stillness and silence, knowing that it is within this silence that we draw close to God and He to us in an unparalleled fashion. And it is there that we come to know the deepest intimacy with Him. Thank you, and God bless you, and have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you soon.